tangential case. But if the court believes that there is some basis for him to invoke that privilege, then I would offer immunity to compel him to testify. So I think it's well laid out in the motion. I don't think I have anything further to add to that.
All right, thank you. Mr. Griffin, I know you don't represent this individual, so I don't know if you have a position on the motion, but if you do.
Well, I do, and I'm very much up to speed on what's going on. I spoke to Mr. Bednar yesterday. I spoke to him again this morning. So I know what's happening in connection with the situation. The representations made by the state in its motion as concerns legal matters, I take no dispute with. I think that's an accurate reflection of the law. I also agree with the summary that's set forth on page 4 about the areas that, page 3, the areas that the state would inquire of Sam Gooch. And that's where I disagree with the state about whether or not he is, so to speak, at risk. If Mr. Sam Gooch would be asked about whether or not he had any knowledge about Mark Gooch surveilling Mennonite churches, that's one thing. Second thing is, in phone conversations with Mark Gooch on the day Sasha Krause went missing, especially during a time period where the state will allege that Mark Gooch was at the Mennonite facility. And thirdly, information about text messages that the court has permitted to be used in evidence from March of 2020 regarding dislike for Mennonites. The state is saying that it cannot see a way where Sam Gooch would be at legal jeopardy from any of those areas if he answered questions. I would take the exact opposite position. I can't imagine somebody being at greater risk than Sam Gooch having had conversations with his brother, who was alleged to be in the process of abducting somebody from the Mennonite facility. I can't imagine him being at greater risk for conspiratorial arguments or facilitation arguments, having a conversation about surveillance a week earlier. I can't imagine having a greater problem with motive and attitude toward Mennonites than being a participant in that text message conversation or other conversations. So I would take the position that I think the court should find it quite clear that Sam Gooch does have jeopardy and does have risks, regardless of whether he's under investigation. I'm not under investigation for anything right now, but if I tell you I did something in the way of a conspiracy with one of my brothers regarding abduction of somebody, I would be in huge legal jeopardy. And that's never going to come out without some sort of grant of immunity. The bigger problem is procedural beyond that. If you don't issue an order requiring him to testify, which would then trigger the state granting immunity, I've never had a chance to interview Sam Gooch, and Sam Gooch won't let me talk to him. I don't think the state's ever interviewed him since, at least since the recent tendency of this case. So I need to be able to interview him, and if he's going to take the Fifth Amendment, I can't do that. So I think it's beneficial for you to address this now, and I think it's frankly necessary for you to indicate that he's going to be required to testify as he has material information and he has legal jeopardy. Thank you.
Mr. Barker, do you have anything further to add on the motion?
Judge, only that the state, of course, has known about these facts, that Sam Gooch had a conversation with his brother, Mark Gooch, that he was aware of the text message about surveillance. These things have been known for some time, and the police have not investigated him further for that. The state certainly hasn't charged him for those acts. But again, I think the safety valve here is the state could simply offer him immunity, and then there would be no danger of jeopardy, as the defense puts it. Further, in response to counsel's, I guess, need to interview Sam Gooch, I agree. I would like to interview Sam Gooch as well, and so I would be happy to stipulate with defense to a deposition if Sam Gooch will not comply. That is, of course, if the court compels him to testify. So we can certainly arrange for some time to do that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to clarify. If the court orders him and then the state offers immunity, grants immunity, I have no doubt that Mr. Bednar would facilitate his interview, but as it stands right now, that's not happening.
So here are my thoughts. I believe since I've been told he's got counsel, Mr. Bednar, I believe we need to set a time to argue this motion, so his attorney has a chance to respond on his behalf. And I don't know when you want to do that in terms of when you're thinking of when you want to call him. So what I'm saying is just let me know when you want to call him, and then we'll figure it out and we'll handle it and get it resolved. Yes?
Yeah, one other thing,
Yes.
I don't know if it's subsequent or not. I avowed in the court that I spoke to Mr. Bednar this morning. I asked him whether or not it would facilitate the process, given that apparently Mr. Gooch is on an airplane and not in an ability to communicate, whether it would facilitate addressing this morning and seeing whether we can resolve the issue of immunity. He gave me approval to raise this on his behalf.
Mr. Bednar did on behalf of Mr. Gooch?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'm granting the motion to compel. So if I'm ready to go forward, I'm going to grant the motion to compel. And if there becomes an issue, the state has advised the court that Mr. Sam Gooch will be granted immunity and will not be prosecuted for anything that he may, that he hasn't been charged with to date, that he may disclose in his testimony and or interview. Is that correct, Mr. Barker?
That's right.
Okay. So with respect, well, for those reasons, the court grants the motion to compel Sam Gooch to testify. And I do believe he needs to submit to an interview, and it sounds like he's, at least from comments with Mr. Bednar, he would do that if the court granted this motion. So I leave that up to you to schedule the interview. If you have any other issues or need the court's assistance to facilitate Sam Gooch participating in an interview by counsel for both parties prior to his testimony, let me know.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, anything further to put on the record before we bring the jury in this morning?
No, not, oh, well, just that Cynthia Shulz is our first witness today, and she's one with the electromagnetic sensitivity. So, however the court wants to address that. If we want to let the jurors know when they arrive or before they come in, I'll leave it to the court.
Okay, so isn't it the issue is the cell phones?
That's right.
And not, we don't have to, didn't you confirm, Mr. Barker, that we don't need to disconnect laptops? I mean, I'm not using this laptop, as you know. This is just, I don't know if I'll end up using it in court, probably not in this trial, but this is for other hearings. You've got your laptop. So we've confirmed that's not an issue, it's just the cell phones.
That's right, and a router if there was one in the room to cover it, but I don't see one, and so she's confirmed that would be okay. I think a bigger issue for her is just the length of exposure, so I think if we're within an hour, it should be fine.
So I don't know where the router's located. We all know that there's wireless in the courthouse that the attorneys and other folks can utilize. So to be honest, I have no idea without checking with Jared where that, if there's probably got to be a router somewhere in the courthouse, and maybe there's more than one, but I have no idea where they are. Are you all right with me not inquiring on that?
Yes, I think we're fine. I think we've satisfied her concerns, and I told her, there's only so many things we can do, of course, so she's okay with that.
So cell phones being turned off should be sufficient.
That should be fine.
All right, so let me just let folks know in the courtroom, because we have a number of people, attorneys, court staff. I doubt that the court staff's got their phones in the courtroom. But if you have a cell phone, please turn it off. Not just silent, turn it off. We have a witness who is requesting that. The other issue, I don't know if these folks were in court last week. I'm pretty tolerant of babies. I know some judges absolutely will not allow them in the courtroom. But if they're quiet, I'm okay with it. But even just talking, even just, the cooing and things babies do. I know I'm a mother, although my kids are, actually just have a 30-year-old, just turned 30 last week, and a 29-year-old or 28-year-old, I apologize. So long time ago that I was a mom of a baby, but I know they can make noises. So any noise at all, they've got to be taken out of the courtroom immediately. And then if the baby's sleeping, the baby's quiet, you can come back in. That's what I said last week. Because it can be distracting to the jury. I want the jury not distracted and be able to focus on the testimony and evidence that's being presented. Okay, Mr. Griffin, anything you need to put on the record before we call for the jury? Okay, all right. It'll take a couple minutes to get them in the courtroom. So we're going to call for the jury right now. We stand in recess until the jury comes in. The record will reflect the presence of counsel, the defendant, and the jury. Mr. Barker, you may call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. We'll say call Cynthia Shulz.
Do you solemnly swear under penalty of perjury the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you say your name for the record and spell your last name, please?
Cynthia Schultz, Schulz.
Thank you. And where do you live, Cynthia?
I live on the road. I don't have a home right now. I've been on the road for about six years.
And why is that? Is that just a lifestyle choice, or is there some reason for it?
No, it's not a lifestyle choice. I was a teacher almost 30 years in California, and I became overexposed to cell phones and Wi-Fi and routers and antennas and people's devices. And so I was when they call it microwave radiation poisoning. So I had microwave radiation poisoning, and I had to walk away from everything to get in healthy areas.
And is it uncomfortable for you to be here where there's potentially those types of electromagnetic waves happening?
And now I'm at the point where if I had a high exposure, someone's outfit a couple hours later. So right now, thank you for what you've done for me, for having people turn things off. I right now feel okay.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Barker, I hate to interrupt, I just thought of something.
Yes.
I didn't confirm with the jurors.
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you have cell phones, can you turn them off? Not just silent, but turn them completely off. Power them off, please. I meant to let you know that before you came into the courtroom. So let's go ahead and do that, and before Mr. Barker asks his next question.
Thank you, Judge. Yeah.
Okay, looks like everyone's done that, or it's already been done. Go ahead, Mr. Barker.
All right, very good. So Cynthia, we appreciate you being here, and we'll try to make this quick for you. Let me ask you about when you were on the road back in February of 2020. Do you recall where you were traveling then?
Yeah, I do. Right before I got back to Sunset Crater and the road 244, I was in the Pinalina Mountains. It's near Stafford, Arizona. So I was in southern Arizona for about a week, I think, there. And then before that, I was 2 weeks in the Chiricahuas, just more south of there, camping, just in remote areas. And so that's where I had been.
Okay. And so are you driving in a truck with a bunch of camping supplies?
Yeah. Yeah, the bed of my truck I fill with my camping supplies, and then Yeah, and then the inside is filled too, so I'm pretty packed when I'm moving. It's my home at this point, and I sleep outdoors, and so.
All right. And are you alone when you're traveling then?
Yes.
Okay. Any animals?
No, unfortunately, but no.
So let's get more specific about the date of February 21st, 2020. Do you recall that date?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
All right, so you make sure that's on the record.
Yeah.
Let's go chronologically. What do you remember that day? Let's start kind of the morning hours. What were you doing?
Wait, so you're talking about Friday? Friday, February 21st? Is that the date? Okay. So that morning, I had put my bed close to the road, 244, because I'd gotten in about 6 o'clock the night before, and it was getting dark, and I wanted to get set up, before dark.
Sorry, let me just interrupt you real quick. You talked about a road, and this road is near what? What kind of landmarks?
It's near the road that runs, it's an offshoot of the road that runs towards Wapaki ruins. So it comes through Sunset Crater and then goes down, I don't know, like 18 more miles or so to Wapaki. I do not remember the number of that road.
Okay.
244 comes off of it.
It's an offshoot of that more, I guess.
A main road.
That
Paved
road.
road.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and so this 244, that's a dirt road, a forest road, right?
Yeah, like cinder, the cinder hills.
Right. So you wake up the next morning, you camped there that night,
Mm-hmm.
and tell us what was going on that morning.
So I probably woke up about 7, and about 8 or so, I saw a van drive from down the road, farther down than I was on 244. And it kind of drove past me, and I waved to them, and I kind of looked in to see, so I could see who they were, or just recognize people, see people. And then they just drove past. And then, then I got up, and I made breakfast, and I kind of started moving around, unloading my truck a little bit more. I was having an issue with my truck, and so I wanted to lighten its load. And so I was just doing that, setting up camp, and then I was going to go into the visitor center, because I go in now when I get there. When I was getting there the last few times, I started to know a couple of the rangers, and I wanted to let them know I was out there. So I was always going in to say, hey, I'm here for a week.
All right.
And
Let me ask you, how far is the ranger station from where you were camping, roughly?
like 4 or 5 miles, maybe 4 or 5 miles.
Okay, so you drove down there and wanted to check in with them?
So I think around noon I drove down and saw Neil in the kiosk and said hi to Neil, and I said, I'm out on 244, and he said there was a storm coming in, and I knew that and was kind of preparing for that.
Okay. So after you checked in with the ranger station, you got back to your camp.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, it is, yes.
Sorry, it's a habit we have to get into in court.
It's okay.
And so how were you preparing, I guess, for that day? What were you doing when you got back to camp?
Let's see. Covering things up, starting to gather wood, unloading my truck more, and then I moved my bed to a larger pine tree set farther off the road that I thought would be more protective. And then I put the tarp over it. And then I started going around, because I usually, when I get to that area, I usually walk around it because I kind of know the area, and I see, trees that I'm familiar with, and I pick things up, and I'll pick up garbage, check out to see if there's any animals that have been around, just so I know what's going on around there.
Okay. At some point during that day, as you were walking around, did something catch your eye?
I had been collecting wood, and then came up around the back of my camp, and I saw in the distance, like, something white. And, I collect garbage around there. So first thought was like, oh, I'll come back here and I get a white plastic bag or something. And then as I got closer, I had hung clothes out because if I buy clothes, usually from thrift stores, I air them out, you know, and so I had clothes hanging out on a tablecloth somewhere. And I saw this white thing and I thought too then, is it that the tablecloth I put out? And I thought, no, I wasn't back in this area. It's not here, it was like on a rock. And so I walked closer to see what it was, and then when I got closer, I could see it wasn't either of those. And I could tell it was a body, and it was like face down, and I could see that there was a green wrapping next to the white part. And then I could see the calves of the person, and the shoes, and the calves. The skin was kind of an orangey color, like, and I thought it must have been exposed for a while.
Okay. Let me ask you a few questions. Let's back up a little bit. I appreciate this. It sounds a little traumatic, so if you need to take a minute and take a drink, that's okay. How far away was the body from your camp? Do you recall?
I don't really, because I think I lost, you know, perspective kind of at that point. But,
okay. That's all right.
I'm guessing maybe 20 feet.
All right. And how close did you get to the body? Did you ever touch the body?
No.
So how close did you get, do you think?
I think about 10 feet. And I, you know, looked and the sun was still up and it was early afternoon. And I, you know, I think I was hoping that the person was sleeping.
Okay. So what did you do?
And I just looked at the body and I said, ma'am, really loudly, a couple times, ma'am, and there was no movement. And I knew it was not good. And then I ran through my camp. I ran to my truck, got in, and I sped to the visitor center, and I was crying and shaking. And I just said to the person in the kiosk, it wasn't Neela. I just said, you've got to get someone out there. There's a body out there, you've got to get someone to help.
Did you go back to, did you show them where the body was? Did you go back?
No.
Okay.
I stayed. Let's see. I think pretty quickly sheriffs started coming and going. I just remember seeing a lot of sheriff's cars going in. I stayed at the visitor center, and they had a cop, I'm still not sure, or a forest ranger, stay with me. He was so supportive. He stayed with me all day, and then kind of answered questions, you know, about what might be happening. But I did not go back.
And then at some point, I assume you did answer questions of the police, correct?
Yeah, a detective came later in the evening.
Right. Okay.
And questioned me.
May I first witness, Judge? Cynthia, I'm going to show you a couple photos. Okay. And I've shown these to council already. This will be exhibits 107 through 109.
Okay.
So Cynthia, my question is if you recognize what's depicted in those photos.
Yeah, this is my camp.
Okay.
And clothes on chairs hanging out. My table.
That's 107, exhibit 107. Is that the first one there?
Yeah.
Okay. What about 108? You recognize what's in 108?
And my fire pit that I built. Right. Well, now I see there's like a dragged mark. Oh, sometimes I dragged, wood logs.
So Cynthia, we'll show these photos in a minute, but I just want to make sure first, do you recognize what's in
Oh,
the
do I?
So yes or no?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
I recognize it. Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, we'll go into descriptions later. 109, do you recognize what's in 109?
Yes.
All right, move to admit 107 through 109.
Any objection? 107, 108, 109 are admitted.
Any publishers?
You may.
Cynthia, we're going to show these on this projector here.
Okay.
We'll start with 107. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay, just describe for the jury, if you could, what we're looking at here.
It's the camp.
This is a camp off Road 244.
Yeah. That's where I was usually camping the last few times, and I built up a fire pit so it was safer. And wood I was collecting and drying my shoes. And my table, and I, put stuff on. And then, you can't see it, but back behind it is where I put my stove. And then way in the back is a tarp I put up, because I was thinking if it rained a lot, then I would put the table back there so I could, be outside, not have to sit in the truck all the time.
Okay, so you talked about a tarp. Is it back here?
Yeah,
Okay.
a tarp in the back.
All right, very good. Let's go to 108 now. Describe what we're looking at here.
Well, the tarp.
Okay, so this tarp back here, is that the same tarp we saw before?
Yeah.
And look at the screen just so we can make sure we're looking at the same thing. There's a laser right there. See that
Yeah,
in the background?
yeah,
Okay.
that's it.
Now there's some cones here. I assume those weren't there when you arrived, right?
No,
All right.
I can see where the body is now.
So this is the body you located right here on the left side.
Yes.
And you talked about some drag marks. And is it fair to say that you were collecting firewood and possibly dragged some wood along that area?
Yeah.
All right. Now it appears in this photo in 108 that the body is face up. Is that how you recall seeing it?
No.
All right. How was the body situated when you saw it?
It was face down. She was face down. And I could see the backs of her calves and her shoes, were like pointed down.
Let's go to 109. Tell us what we're looking at here. Exhibit 109.
give me a minute?
Of course. Can I help you out, Cynthia?
Yeah,
So there's a white figure
Yeah.
here in the middle.
I mean, I'm just trying to make sense of it. It looks like that it must have been what I was seeing with the body, but maybe from the other angle.
All right, just a different angle from what you saw. Let me call this out a little bit, zoom in. Is that how the body was situated, face down like that? When you discovered it?
You know, I'm sorry, I can't tell because the white, I think, was over the head and the top of the body. And the gray part, I don't remember seeing.
Sorry, it's okay. But you do recall white, what appeared to be a white clothing or cloth over the body, top part of the body?
Yes,
All right, and then you mentioned the calves were exposed, you could see that.
yes,
And shoes as well were on,
yes,
face down in the dirt.
yes.
Have a moment, Judge. Cynthia, those are all the questions I have, thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Griffin?
Only one question for you, ma'am, if I could. I'm here.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. You mentioned the van that you saw that morning. Do you recall that?
A little bit.
Was there anything about the van, the way it was driven, the way it passed by while you were there at the side of the road, that you in any way thought was suspicious or unusual?
No, not a lot of people camped down there or in that area, but there would be people who would go in. And it was driving kind of slowly. The road is not, it's all pebbly, so you can't go real fast on the road.
Had you seen that vehicle the night before?
No. I had seen the light the night before, the vehicle down the road, and I thought somebody's down there camping, but I hadn't seen.
Did the motors, when it went by you, did whoever was driving that, did they try to hide from you or avoid you in any way?
No, I couldn't see in very well. I don't know if it was the sun but no, they just kind of slowly drove by.
And did you see that van return?
No.
Is that the only vehicle you saw in the area that day?
Yes.
No further. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Barker?
Thank you. Just a brief follow-up. That's a pretty remote area from your experience, right, Cynthia?
Yes.
You don't often see vehicles there.
It's an ATV road back to the Cinders area or something back there, so that was mostly what I saw.
I don't think you have anything else. Thank you.
Do any of the jurors have a question for this witness before she's excused? All right, does not appear so. Mr. Barker, may this witness be excused?
Yes, thank you.
All right, you are excused. You can step down.
Thank you.
Mr. Barker, you may call your next witness.
Thank you. The state calls Samuel Koon.
affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? This you do under the penalty of perjury?
And then Father Bailey, he's going to direct you to the witness.
Proceed, Judge. Thank you. Good morning, sir. Hold that microphone a little closer and speak loudly, please.
Okay.
Perfect. Can you state your name for the record, please?
I'm Samuel Koon.
All right, Samuel, where do you live?
I live just outside Aztec, New Mexico.
All right. Is that where the Lamp and Light Publishing House is?
I live about 9.5 miles from the Lamp and Light Publishing House.
All right. Did you previously live in that area?
When we first moved out, I lived close to Lamp and Light Publishers.
Okay. And you're a Mennonite, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And were you raised in the church? Were you born into that religion?
I was about 19 when I joined the Mennonite church.
Okay. Are you married?
I am.
And what's your wife's name?
Juanita.
Juanita. Do you have kids?
We have 8.
Your kids. Good for you. Let me ask you about some events that occurred back in January of 2020, okay?
Okay.
On January 18th, which would have been a Saturday, do you recall what you were doing that day?
I don't recall what we were doing the day, but in the evening we were playing a game as a family around our kitchen table, and my wife said we needed to go over to the church and get some items for a meal the next day after church, and we needed to get a water cooler. I also needed to get a speaker system for that.
Okay, where were you going the next day? What was the plan?
The next day, that was to a little church building in Klein, Colorado, where we had begun holding church services just to see what interest there was, and also to relieve the congestion. We had quite a few people in our church building
Okay.
there in Farmington.
Yeah, how far away is Klein from that area?
Klein was 32 miles from our home. I'm not sure how far it was from our Farmington church building.
Okay. So, if I understand correctly, you and your wife went to the church, is that right?
That is correct.
And this would have been the evening of January 18th.
Correct.
Do you recall what time you arrived at the church?
I believe it was around 10 minutes to 8.
All right, so 7:50 p.m. And you said you were there to get a speaker system and a water cooler?
The speaker system was at a home close to the church. Gerald Reel had that speaker system. We went over to his place. He showed me how it worked, helped me carry it out, put it in the minivan, and then we went up to the church building to get the water cooler and whatever items my wife had in mind that she needed.
Gotcha. So you first went to another individual's house, got the speaker system, then went
Correct.
back. I see. So you arrived at the church about 10 to 8, is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And the water cooler, what was the reason for getting that?
There was a meal after the service, and we just had a water cooler there for water for the people to, as they went through the line, they could get water.
All right. And that was for the next day, Sunday?
That is correct.
When you showed up at the church, well, describe to the jury where you went first when you got to the church.
We went, and at first I swung up into the upper parking lot. It was dark or growing dark, and my wife and I were talking together, spending a little time alone, and I swung up into the upper parking lot. She said, no, you'll need to be in the lower, go down below. So we swung around into the lower parking lot by the door, went in and got the items.
Okay. When you were on that top set, and we've seen some photos, we'll show those in a minute, but when you got to that top level, did you see any other vehicles in the area?
I did not. I was not on the alert for anything.
Okay. Was the church dark when you got there?
It was. When we went in, I noticed that the supply closet where we got the water cooler and the other items, the light was on there, and I turned that off when I left.
Okay. Was it customary back in those days for the church to be unlocked?
Correct.
Okay, so anybody could walk in at any time?
Right.
That area, we've seen some photos, but I'll ask you more specifically when we talk about those photos. Do you recall, though, what the lighting situation was like outside the church?
I believe there was a small light above the door at the upstairs entrance, as well as a small light above the door at the downstairs entrance.
Okay. There weren't big pole lights outside on the roadway?
Correct, it was very dark.
Okay. Do you recall the weather that day?
I'm sorry, I do not. It was clear weather.
Was it cold or warm, do you recall?
I know it was chilly afterwards because, I remember as we were searching and so on that it was cold, and I remember being cold sometimes.
All right. So you went, after you got to that top section, I guess the first level of the church, you swung down with your car and got to that lower section. What kind of car were you driving?
I was driving a Dodge 2006 minivan.
All right. And again, you and Juanita were together at that time?
That is correct. I was driving.
Okay. And when you got to the bottom section, did both of you go into the church?
We did.
All right. Did you notice anything in the church as you were collecting items, anything unusual?
The only thing I noticed was that light on in the supply closet. It was unusual.
Okay. Did you gather the items you went there for?
We did. We took those out to the minivan, and my wife said, let's go upstairs and get the mail. We went up the stairs on the ladies' side, got the mail, then went back down, got into the minivan, and went home. Actually, we went out and got gas at a gas station, and then went home.
All right, let me break that up a little bit. So the mail situation, are you guys getting mail at the church? How does that work?
We have a mailbox there. We also get mail elsewhere at a mailbox at Lamplight Publishers and also close to our home. So we actually have 3 mailboxes. We have especially periodicals that are put into the mailboxes there in the church building.
Gotcha. How long do you think you spent at the church?
It wasn't long.
In terms of minutes, what would you
Just a few minutes, probably.
Okay. Did you see anybody else there?
We did not.
Did you see any cars arrive or leave?
We did not.
Okay. Give me a little time after I ask the question, just so that the reporter can take it down. Okay. Thank you. You mentioned after you left, you went and got some gas. Where did you go?
That was Circle K out on Route 516, several miles probably from the church building.
Okay. And why did you get gas that night?
We were going to go to Klein the next day. I suppose that was the reason.
Okay. Would you try to avoid doing those things on Sunday?
Generally.
After you got the gas, where did you go?
We went home.
And your home again was where at that time?
Our home was just outside of Aztec, New Mexico. It still is. We've been there 5 or 6 years at that particular location.
Okay. And I get, again, it was how many miles away from the Lamp and Light?
That's 9.5 miles.
Okay.
Approximately.
So you weren't right there around the church. You were some distance away still.
That is correct.
And later that night, after you got home, do you recall being awakened by a phone call?
Yes, sir. Sometime after 3 o'clock in the morning, my wife's phone rang. She said, "Oh no, it's Lucinda Hurst." She says, "Sasha is missing." And then they lost connection.
Okay. And what did you do in response to that phone call?
I said, "That can't be true. Sasha is a very smart person."
And did you stay in the house? Did you leave the house? What action did you take?
Lucinda Hurst called back and gave additional details. At that point, I realized that it was indeed a serious situation. I dressed, I got my cordless spotlight, went out to my minivan, and went over to the to the church.
Right. And when you got to the church, were there others there that were gathering?
I parked in the upper parking lot. I checked the area, did not find anybody, although I did see one or possibly two deputies shining flashlights along the lane as I drove up the lane toward the church. So I took my spotlight, I went in the upper entry and shone around, went down the stairs, taking the path that I thought Sasha would have taken.
All right. How many people were out there doing that search with you?
At first, as I mentioned, there were two deputies, but at the time I entered the church, I was alone.
Okay. And while you were looking around the church with that light, did you notice anything unusual?
I did not.
Did you search any other places aside from the church?
Yes, I went down to Lamp and Light at some point, and Paul Kaufman was in his office making phone calls. Paul Kaufman is the general manager of Lamp and Light. I know Kurt Morse was around somewhere. I do not remember.
Okay. Fair to say nobody was able to locate Sasha that night, right?
That is correct.
Anything unusual that you saw as you were searching around?
I did not.
Thank you. May I have a moment, Judge? So you talked about the van you were driving. What color was it?
Teal.
All right, those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
Thank you. Good morning, sir. My name is Bruce Griffin. I'm counsel for Mr. Mark Gooch. I'll be asking you some questions as well. All right?
Good morning.
I just want to go back on a couple of things that you were asked about. Let me just start with this. Were you the subject of interviews by law enforcement after it had been determined that Sasha was missing?
I was.
Can you tell me roughly how many different interviews you were subject to?
Twice I went in for formal interviews. I spoke with law enforcement on other occasions.
Was there concern expressed about an inconsistency about what you did or did not do at the church?
There was.
Could you explain that to me?
Yes. On Sunday, when I spoke informally with the detective, I told him that we had gone in the upper entrance and gone downstairs. Monday morning, I realized that was not correct, and I had someone tell him that we had gone in the bottom entrance.
So just to be clear for our purposes of testimony today, if I understand your path of travel, it was you went to the upper parking lot first, and did you actually become stationary at that point in your car?
We did not.
Did you roll by?
We drove by. We swung into the upper parking lot and around into the bottom parking lot, sir.
Okay, so you didn't stop there,
Correct.
and you didn't enter there.
Correct.
You indicated that you were having some time with Juanita.
Correct.
And no, to your memory at this point, what you relate to law enforcement, you saw no vehicles in the upper lot.
I was not looking for any vehicle, but I did not notice any.
Would it have been unusual to have a car or cars at the church at that hour of the evening on a Saturday?
No, sir.
Would there be a reason to be at the church in the evening on a Saturday normally?
That is our church building. It's our place of worship. Anyone from our congregation is welcome to be there at any time.
From your perspective, seeing and at least remembering no cars, seeing no activity inside, did you think the building was essentially empty?
Correct.
So, are you familiar with the car driven by, at that time, by Sasha?
Afterwards, it was parked there. We passed it on multiple occasions, looked in the windows, but prior to that occasion, I had not taken notice.
So, what I'm going to break down for you to make clear to the jury is that Sasha's car, you knew what it looked like before that day. Is that fair?
I'm not sure.
It was made known to you what it looked like after Sasha went missing.
It was parked there.
So what I want to work on is when you were at the upstairs, it wasn't parked up there when you were there. Is that correct?
Sir, as I stated, I was not taking notice of vehicles.
When did you become first aware that Sasha's car was at or near the church building?
On Sunday morning, I passed it as I went into the upper entrance in search of her.
Can you clarify for the jury today whether or not that would have been something new, or it is possible that that could have been there and you didn't notice it the night before?
It could have been.
And that vehicle was made known to you on Sunday that that was Sasha's car.
Correct.
Now, while you were at the upper portion of the lot as you drove down to the lower level, did you see any individual people walking or somewhere near the facility?
There was one of the workers at the Gingrich home walking up the lane as my wife and I approached the church building.
Male or female?
Female.
You know her?
She was a worker. I cannot recall her name.
A testimony from a lady named Esther Shea. Does that sound familiar to you?
I know her, but it was not her.
Not her. But it was somebody walking up from the assisted care facility?
Correct. She was doing a term of service there working at the assisted care facility.
And coming up past the church?
She was not at the church when we passed. She was perhaps midway up the drive.
Which would be roughly how far, sir, from that point to where you were?
From that point to the church building, 100 or 200 yards, perhaps.
And the lighting was such that did you have conversation or you just saw?
We drove by. It was dark or growing dark at that point.
But you drove along as she was walking?
She was walking to the right side of the lane.
But no conversation?
No, sir.
At that time, or any time while you were at or near the church building before you left for the Circle K, did you ever see a white car?
I did not.
Are you familiar with any white hatchback type cars owned by anybody associated with the church building?
No, sir.
You familiar with anybody that drives a white hatchback car that's associated with anybody there that lives on the premises?
No, sir.
Are strange cars that are not known to the community, is that a common occurrence or is that unusual?
During the daytime, we see some, but at night it would have been cause for a question.
Thank you. Now, I want to follow you when you rolled through the upper parking lot, came down to the lower parking lot. I want to kind of be clear on how you parked your car. Did you go parallel to the building, nose to the building? Can you be a little bit more clear if you could possibly recall that?
I would suggest that I park parallel to the building or else backed up.
Both you and Juanita exited the car.
Right.
And then you would have walked a short distance to the door?
Correct.
Would your car essentially have been in front of the door?
Very close.
Estimate that we're talking 10 feet, me to you, what would you think?
Possibly from me to you.
So maybe 10 or 20 feet.
Yes, sir.
Now, during that period of time, did any other individual come closer to the church facility? Did you see anyone else at that point?
No, sir.
Saw no other cars?
No, sir.
The car that was brought to your attention the next morning that was identified as Sasha's car, that car didn't pull up while you were there.
No, sir.
You would have noticed that.
Yes, sir.
You said that you were there at 7:50 was your estimate. That's a pretty precise estimate. How can you be so clear?
When we arrived at Circle K, my wife said she looked at van clock, and it was around 8 o'clock, so she estimated that we were there around 7:50.
Gotcha. Thank you. There was, as we've been told, some sort of a collection box for monies to be deposited to buy calendars for the year. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
I do, sir.
Was that in the upper area or the lower area?
That was in the upper area.
Did you notice anything about that being disturbed or changed?
I did not, sir.
I have no further questions for Ms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
Just a few more questions, Samuel. Thank you. You mentioned on cross that you didn't notice if Sasha's car was there. Did you know what her car looked like prior to that night?
I don't know that I had taken notice of it. She usually walked to work. She lived not far from Electrolyte Publishers.
Right. So then is it fair to say you didn't know all the cars that people drove in that community?
It would be fair.
But it could have been there, and Sasha's car could have been there, you just weren't taking notice of any cars.
That is correct. My wife and I were talking, laughing. It was a time we had together.
I understand. Saturdays is a day to prepare for Sunday, is that fair?
Especially then, because we were having church services at another facility.
All right, so it would not be unusual for you or anyone else to go to the church that night?
No.
The individual you saw walking from the Gingrich home, could it have been Ruby Rudolph? Is that possible? If you know.
I do not recall, sir.
It's all right. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Do any of the jurors have a question for this witness before the witness is excused? All right, apparently not. Mr. Barker, may this witness be excused?
Yes.
You may be excused and step down. Thank you. Mr. Barker, may you call your next witness?
Thank you. State calls Juanita.
Do you affirm the testimony you're about to give be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? This you do under the penalty of perjury?
You need to answer at the end of what she said. So, I'm sorry, you just go ahead and answer yes or no.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then follow the bailiff. Please. You may proceed when ready, Mr. Barker.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ma'am. Can you state your name for the record, please?
I'm Juanita Koon.
All right, thank you. And do me a favor, just pull the microphone just a tad closer. You can move the entire unit there if you need to. Maybe not. Okay.
Like that?
That's fine, thank you. Juanita, we just talked to your husband, Samuel, right?
Yes.
Okay, and you have 8 kids?
Yes.
All right. And we've heard that you live near the Lamp and Light community.
Yes.
Okay. How long have you lived there?
It's about 17 years.
And during that time, did you get to know someone named Sasha Krause?
Yes, I did.
All right. What was your relationship like with Sasha?
Well, she would come over to my house sometimes. I'd invite her over, or she'd just want to come and we'd visit, and she would maybe play with the children or read a book, or it was a very comfortable relationship.
All right. And do you work in that community, or were you mostly at home?
No, I was mostly at home.
With the kids?
Yes.
All right. And I want to ask you specifically about a night in January 2020, okay? Do you recall the 18th of January and what you were doing that night?
Yes.
All right, let's take that chronologically then. That evening or late afternoon, what were you doing with Samuel?
Well, we were at home, and we had supper, and then we played a game with the family, and then we knew that we were going to go to the Klein Church House the next morning for services, and we knew we needed to pick up a water jug and a speaker
Okay.
to hold services.
And Klein, we've heard this is in Colorado, right?
Yes.
Okay. How far away is it from the Lamp and Light area?
It's about 45 minutes to an hour.
All right. So you were on that Saturday preparing for the Sunday service the next day?
Yes.
Gotcha. And so did you go to the church then?
Yes, we went to the church, but I had told Mr. Griffin when we talked on the phone that we went directly to the church. And later I remembered that we had gone to Gerald Reel's house first and picked up the speaker.
Okay. So that was at one of the community members' house?
Yes.
Gotcha. And the speaker was for the Sunday service tomorrow?
It was for the Sunday service, yes, so that so you could hear better in the service.
All right. I know what the judge is going to say in a minute. We got to give ourselves some distance or some time in between answers and questions. That way we can get the recording done correctly, okay? So just maybe take a beat and then answer the question. All right?
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so we were talking about you going to the church. You first stopped at someone's house to pick up the speaker, and then did you drive to the church?
Yes, then we drove over to the church just a stone's throw away from the house.
And when you got to the church, what did you see?
We drove up to the top. There's a top parking lot and a bottom parking lot, and we drove up to the top and made a turnaround, and I told Samuel, I said, let's not stop here because the water jug is in the basement. So we turned around and drove down to the bottom and stopped there.
Okay. We've heard some testimony about the lighting situation. What do you recall about how light it was around the church at that time?
It was dark. There was one pole light on the corner at the top where at the top of the church.
Okay. At the parking lot or on actually attached to the church?
Yes. Yes, on the corner of the church house right at the, yes.
I understand. Aside from that light, no other lights around that area?
No lights around that area. There was a light down at the bottom by that door.
And this would have been the basement area of the church?
Yes.
Okay. When you were up in that upper section, did you notice any vehicles?
Yes, I saw a light gray car with a huge dent in the side.
Okay. That dent stood out in your mind?
Yes, it did.
Did you know whose car that was?
I did not recall whose car it was.
All right. Had you seen it before?
Yes, I had seen it before.
Did you learn later that it was Sasha's car?
Yes, I had learned later that it was Sasha's car.
Okay. But at the time you didn't know whose it was?
It did not cross through my mind whose car it was.
And is it fair to say that you weren't looking at cars and trying to figure out whose cars were parked there?
That is fair.
Okay. Was it unusual for people to park in that area on a Saturday night?
I would say possibly yes, but at the time I thought, well, whoever's car this is, they probably met somebody here and went somewhere and were going to come back.
I see. So after you drove through that top section and you told Samuel, hey, let's go to the basement area, that's where the jug is. Did you drive down to the basement area?
Yes, we drove down to the basement area.
And then when you got there, how did you park, or how did Samuel park the car? Do you remember?
He just kind of parked alongside the sidewalk right there beside the door.
Okay. Backing in or parallel, how do you recall?
I would say probably just long ways. We just parked closest to the door that you could get.
Okay. Kind of parallel to the building?
Yes.
All right. And did you go inside the church?
Yes, I went inside the church and I told Samuel, let's not turn on any lights. We don't need to turn on any lights because he was right beside me and he had his phone and he had it lit. And so we went into the storage room right there and picked up the water jug.
Okay. Now, when you say he had the phone lit, so there was a flashlight on the phone?
Yes, his phone has a flashlight on it.
Okay, so you were, if I understand correctly, this is a quick stop, just went into the church, you had the phone light on, and you were just going to grab the jug and leave.
Yes, that's right.
Did you do anything else while you were in the church?
Yes, I dropped the water jug on the floor and went upstairs, and Samuel said, where are you going? And I said, I am going up to check our church mailbox to see if we have any pictures or papers or anything in it.
Okay.
So I went up there, up the one stairs, and he went up the other stairs, and we met up there and got the papers out of the mailbox and came back down to the basement.
And was it still dark? Did you turn on any lights to go upstairs?
We did not turn on any lights. It was still dark.
Okay. But you could see well enough inside without the light?
I mean, it was pretty dark, but like I said before, he had his flashlight on his phone lit.
Gotcha. And how long were you upstairs gathering mail?
I'm guessing we were up there for about a minute.
Okay. How about in total, inside the church, how long were you there?
I would say probably not more than 3 minutes.
Okay. The entire time parking to leaving, how long do you think you were at the parking lot?
No more than 5 minutes.
All right. When did you arrive at the church, do you recall?
It was a little bit before 8 o'clock in the evening.
When you were at the church, did you notice anything unusual, any disturbance inside the church?
I saw nothing.
Did you see anybody while you were at the church walking around? Any cars moving around?
I saw nobody and nothing.
Okay. Aside from the Sasha's parked car, what you later learned to be Sasha's parked car in the top parking lot, any other cars in that area that you recall?
No.
After you got the water jug and the mail, where did you guys go?
So then we left the parking lot and went down past the Greenwich home and Lamp and Light and everything. And then Samuel said, I think we should probably get gas because the trip to Klein is from our place, it's about 32 minutes away. And so we went down over Crouch Mesa and down to the gas station at Circle K.
All right. And how far is that Circle K, do you recall?
I'm guessing 2 miles, 3 miles, something like that.
Right. After going to the gas station, did you go anywhere else?
No, we went home.
Okay. Later that evening, did you get a phone call about Sasha?
Yes, later that evening, it was about 3:30 in the morning. Lucinda Hurst called me and woke me up and said, do you know where Sasha is?
Okay. When was the last time you recalled speaking to Sasha or communicating with her?
It was that Saturday, probably in the morning. I texted her and asked if she would make a salad for 10 people, and she said, sure, I will. And that was the last.
So it was earlier that day?
Yes, it was earlier that day.
When you got that phone call, did you take any action at that time?
Yes. Samuel was beside me and he said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Lucinda says Sasha is missing."
Okay. Did you leave the house to go help at that point?
I did not.
What about Samuel?
Yes, he did. He got up. He said, "Well, I can hardly believe she's missing. There has to be an answer." So he got up and got dressed and left right away.
All right. Have a moment, Judge.
That's all I have. Thank you, Juanita.
Thank you. Good morning, ma'am. I have a few questions for you. I'm Bruce Griffin. I represent Mr. Gooch. All right.
Okay?
And you're right. You and I spoke earlier. You recall that apparently. Is that right?
Yes, I recall that.
Did you review a transcript of that interview?
Yes, I did.
I appreciate you telling me that you left out a part about going and getting the speakers. All right. I want to ask you a couple things. Also during that interview, I'd asked you whether at any point that day when you went to the church to get the jug, as you call it,
Yes.
you had seen anybody on the way or at the church or leaving. Do you recall that testimony?
Yes.
Do you recall whether you told me you remembered anybody?
I told you that I did not see anybody.
We just had Mr. Gooch testify, Mr. Koon testify, and he told us that he remembered seeing a female walking from the Gingrich home, the assisted care facility, up the roadway toward the church. Do you recall that?
I do not recall that.
You spoke to, when Sasha went missing, you spoke to your husband about his conversation with the police. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And in reviewing that, he told you that he had told the investigators that he went into the church from the upstairs area and parked upstairs. Do you recall that?
Yes, I remember he told me that. He told them that.
All right. And that's not the way you remembered it, was it?
No, that's not the way I remembered it.
You convinced him that he went in through the downstairs area. Is that right?
I didn't convince him. I just told him, "No, remember we went down the downstairs."
His memory was different than that.
Yes, his memory was.
When did you have any conversation with your husband about the car that you've testified seeing, you saw in the parking lot, the car with the dent?
Okay, that was another thing I remembered. I told you that I thought I told him, "Wow, that car has a big dent in the side." And later I thought, "Oh no, I didn't. I just thought it."
All right, so let's be clear. When you talked to me, you mentioned that you conveyed to Sam at the time about the car, right?
Yes.
We just talked to Sam. Sam said there wasn't any conversation about that. He didn't remember that. You now are telling me what? About
I am telling you that later, after I had talked to you on the phone,
right?
then I recalled that I did not tell him, I did not mention to him about the dent in the side. I just thought it.
But regardless of what you said or didn't say, are you clear today and representing clearly to us that you absolutely saw that car in the parking lot?
Yes, I did.
And we're talking about which parking lot, upper or lower?
It was the upper parking lot.
And was it in a nose toward the building? Can you remember how it was positioned?
Yes, it was parked a little diagonal toward the building and the lawn.
What would be the distance between the car and the front door upstairs? Just your best guess.
I'm not good on distance, probably 20, 30 feet.
Would it be accurate to say that if a person was going to get church materials for Sunday that included Sunday school type books or materials, that would be located down in the lower level?
Yes.
So the fastest way to get that would have been to park down below and go in down below. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the council asked you this, but other than seeing that single parked car with a dent, did you see any other car parked at the church area?
I did not.
Did you see any car white in color with a hatchback while you drove near or at the church?
I did not.
Did it cross your mind at the time that you saw the car with the dent that there might be somebody there at the church?
It did not cross my mind because the church house was all dark.
At any point in time while you were inside the church, did you ever turn off any light that had been on?
I did not.
Did you ever see your husband do that?
He did not.
I just had a little bit. I have no further questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Barker.
I don't have anything, thank you.
Do any of the jurors have a question for this witness? Okay, looks like we may. Counsel, will you approach? So I'm going to actually read the question to you that the juror has written, the questions the juror has written out. And I'm reading them just the way they've been written out. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
When going up the stairs, did you have additional light to navigate your side of the stairs?
I did not.
When you and husband arrived at the church, did you park in upper lot or only turn around?
We only turned around.
Any other questions from the jury before I turn the witness over for potential follow-up? All right, don't see any indication any of the jurors have any additional questions for this witness. Any follow-up, Mr. Barker?
No, thank you.
Mr. Griffin?
Okay.
May this witness be excused, Mr. Barker?
Yes, thank you.
You are excused. You may step down. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I think it's going to be a good time to take our recess because that way, well, we've been going, although we didn't get you into the courtroom until about 10 after 9, we were actually working on the case with the court reporter. So Dahlia's been working since before 9. And so that's I'm just explaining it to you why I'm going to take a break at this point in time. You know, we've been going not quite an hour and a half, but again, if we take our break now, this will put us in good timing to be able to probably not need another break before the lunch hour. All right, so this is our morning recess. Remember the admonition, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Please do not talk about the case with anyone. Do not let anyone talk to you about it. Keep an open mind, and please do not form any opinions about the case. Please be back in the jury room in approximately, I would say, 13 minutes if you decide to leave the jury room, just so we can call for you and try to get you in. We'll call for you in 15 minutes is what I'm trying to explain. You can leave your jury notebooks on your chairs if you want to, or you can bring them with you into the jury room. It's up to you. We stand in recess. Please be seated. I'm going to reflect the jury's been excused from the morning recess. Counsel, anything further before we take the recess? All right, we stand in recess.